couldn't keep running from hotel to hotel. So we decided to try staying with an old friend of mine, Brian, who lived in a different state. Brian and I went way back. We were high school buddies, played football together. We were really close back then. He was a tough guy, worked as a mechanic now, lived alone in a small house. I figured if anyone could help us figure this out, it was him. Plus, his place was off the grid. No Wi-Fi, no fancy security system. Maybe that would make it harder for whoever was doing this to track us. We got to Brian's late at night, and he welcomed us with open arms. He didn't ask too many questions, just saw how exhausted we were, and set us up in his guest room. The kids were quiet, too tired to even complain. And Sarah, she just looked hollow, like she was running on fumes. I told Brian a little about what was going on, the calls, the cameras, Lisa's disappearance. He listened, nodding slowly, and said he'd keep an eye out. For 2 days, it was quiet. No calls, no texts, no weird devices. I started to think, maybe we'd finally found a safe spot. Brian helped keep the kids distracted, playing board games with them, while I tried to piece together what was happening. I kept thinking about Lisa's basement, that voice modulator, the photos. It didn't add up. Why would she do this? And if it wasn't her, who was using her house? On the third day, Brian got a call on his landline. He answered, then handed me the phone, his face tight. "It's for you," he said. My stomach sank. That scratchy voice came through. "Jack, you trust Brian, don't you? Ask him about the summer of '99. I hung up. My hands were shaking. The summer of '99? That was our senior year. Me and Brian were tight back then. But we'd had a falling out over a girl. Jenny. It got messy, fights, accusations. The kind of dumb stuff teenagers do. We made up eventually, but it was never the same. I looked at Brian, who was watching me closely. "What's this about '99? I asked. He shrugged, said he didn't know, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. That's when I started to wonder. Brian had always been a little secretive, even back in high school. He'd had a temper too, got into fights more than once. I tried to shake it off, but the voice's words kept echoing in my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brian, about '99, about everything. Around 2 a.m., I heard a noise outside, a low thud, like something hitting the side of the house. I grabbed a flashlight and went out to check. Nothing, just the wind, I told myself. But when I came back inside, I noticed Brian's truck was gone. He hadn't said anything about going out. I waited up until he got back, around 4 a.m. He said he'd gone to get gas, but his truck's tank was half empty, and there was mud on the tires, like he'd been off-road. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed proof. The next day, I borrowed his laptop, said I needed to check my email. I looked through his browser history, his files, anything I could find, and there it was, a folder buried deep in his documents, labeled J99. Inside were photos, old ones from high school, me, Brian, Jenny, but there were newer ones too. Photos of my house, my car, Sarah at the grocery store. The same kind of photos we'd found in Lisa's basement. My heart was racing. Was Brian involved? Had he been holding a grudge all these years? I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was staring me in the face. I confronted him that night, after the kids were asleep. I showed him the folder, demanded answers. He got defensive, said he didn't know where the photos came from, that someone must have hacked his computer. But his story didn't add up. Why would someone plant photos on his laptop? And why bring up '99? Sarah was done. She said we couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even Brian. We packed up to leave, but as we were loading the car, my phone buzzed. A text from Brian's number. "You shouldn't have looked, Jack." I turned around, and Brian was standing in the doorway, watching us. He didn't say anything, just stared. I got the kids in the car and peeled out of there. We drove to another hotel, but the calls started again almost immediately. The voice described the hotel lobby, the clothes Noah was wearing, even the vending machine I'd used. I checked the room for cameras. Found one, in the air vent. I was starting to lose it. Everyone we trusted, Lisa, Brian, was turning out to be part of this. Or at least, it seemed that way. But then came the thing that broke me. I got a call from the police. They'd found Lisa. She was fine, staying with a friend in another state. She said she'd left her house because she'd gotten a creepy call, just like ours, telling her to get out. The setup in her basement? It wasn't hers. Someone had broken in while she was gone, planted the equipment, the photos, everything. And Brian? He called me later, apologized, said he'd found a camera in his own house, hidden in his smoke detector. He swore he wasn't involved, but I didn't know what to believe anymore. The voice was playing us, turning everyone we knew into suspects. And it wasn't done. The next call came from my own number again. Jack, you're running out of places to hide. Check the kids' backpacks. I tore through Emily and Noah's bags. And there it was, a small black device, blinking, tucked into the bottom of Noah's backpack. Someone had been with us, close enough to plant that, and we hadn't even noticed. We were running out of options. Hotels, friends, family. Nowhere felt safe. Sarah suggested we go somewhere random, a place no one would expect. So we picked a small bed and breakfast in a tiny town we'd never heard of, about 3 hours away. It was a last-ditch effort to disappear. We paid in cash, even used fake names. Didn't tell anyone where we were going. I even left our phones behind, thinking maybe that would stop the calls. The B&B was run by an older couple, Ed and Martha, who seemed nice enough. The place was cozy, out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The kids were starting to act like kids again, playing in the backyard. And Sarah, she even smiled a little. But I couldn't let my guard down. I kept checking the windows, the doors, every corner of the house. Then came the second night. I noticed a guy sitting alone in the dining room, eating breakfast. He looked about 40, average build, nothing special, but he kept glancing at us. Not in a friendly way, more like he was studying us. I asked Martha who he was. She said he was a regular, a guy named Mark. Stayed there a few times a year. Said he was a writer. Worked on his book in the quiet of the countryside. Seemed harmless, but I didn't like the way he looked at us. That night, the B&B's phone rang. Martha answered, then called me over. "It's for you," she said. My heart sank. That voice again, scratchy low, almost mocking. "Jack, you think you're clever, hiding out here? I see you talking to Martha. Mark's watching you too, isn't he?" I hung up. My hands were shaking. How did they know we were here? We hadn't told anyone. Hadn't used our phones. No GPS. Nothing. I looked out the window, and there was Mark, sitting on the porch, staring at the fields. I didn't know if he was part of this, but I wasn't taking chances. I told Sarah we had to leave, but she was done running. She said if we didn't figure out who was doing this, it would never stop. So I decided to talk to Mark. I went out to the porch, sat down next to him, tried to act casual. "Nice place, huh?" I said. He nodded, didn't say much, just kept staring at the fields. I asked what he was writing. He said it was a true crime book, about stalking cases. That hit me like a punch. Was he studying us for his book? Or was he the one behind the calls? I didn't push too hard, didn't want to tip him off. But later that night, I snuck into the B&B's office. They kept guest records in there. I found Mark's file. Basic stuff. Name, address, a few past stays. But then I saw it. A note, saying he'd asked about us when we checked in. Wanted to know our names, how long we were staying. That wasn't normal guest behavior. The next morning, I cornered him in the dining room. I confronted him. He denied everything. Said he was just curious. Said he liked to know who he was staying with. But his eyes were nervous. And that same afternoon, he left. Said he had to get back to the city. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe he was the guy. And now, he was gone. But that night, the BNB's phone rang again. The voice described the kids, playing in the backyard, described Sarah, reading a book in the lounge. I checked the house, and I found another camera, this time in a light fixture. I was losing it. Mark was gone, but someone was still watching us. And then came what made me question everything. I got a package in the mail, addressed to me, at the BNB, no return address. Inside was a USB drive. I didn't want to plug it in, but I had to know. I used Martha's old computer, one that wasn't connected to the internet. The drive had one file, a video, grainy, but I saw myself, standing outside our house, back in January, during the blackout. I was holding a phone, talking, but it wasn't my voice. It was the scratchy voice, dubbed over the footage. The thing is, I hadn't been outside that night. I was inside, looking for batteries. Someone had faked this video, made it look like I was the one making the calls. I showed it to Sarah. She just stared at me, her eyes full of fear. "Jack, what if it's you?" she whispered. I laughed it off, said it was impossible. But deep down, I was scared. What if I was losing it? What if I was doing all this, and didn't even know? The next call came from the BNB's phone again. "Jack, you saw the video. You know the truth now." I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was I the one behind this? Or was someone trying to make me think I was? We left the BNB the next day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was closer than I wanted to admit. We couldn't keep running forever. Sarah was falling apart. The kids were traumatized, and I was starting to question my own sanity. We decided to go back home, not because it felt safe, but because we needed to face this. I figured if we were going to figure out who was doing this, we had to stop hiding and start fighting back. So we packed up and drove back to our house in Washington. The place felt different when we got back. It was our home, but it didn't feel like ours anymore. Every creak, every shadow made me jump. I checked the house top to bottom, every room, every closet, the basement. I found 2 more cameras, one in the living room, one in the kids' bedroom. I smashed them, but I knew it wasn't enough. Whoever this was, they'd just plant more. So, I decided to take things into my own hands. I went to a local electronics store, bought a signal jammer, some basic surveillance gear, and a few motion sensors. I wasn't a tech guy, but I figured I could at least try to catch whoever was doing this. I set up the motion sensors around the house, pointed a cheap security camera at the front door, kept the jammer on 24/7 to block any signals. If they were using cameras or phones, maybe I could mess with their setup. And for a couple of days, it actually worked. No calls, no texts, no creepy voices. The kids started to relax a little. Sarah was sleeping better, but I wasn't fooled. I knew this wasn't over. On the 3rd night, the motion sensor in the backyard went off. I grabbed my flashlight and a crowbar, told Sarah to lock herself in the bedroom with the kids, and I went outside. The backyard was empty, just the swing set and some trees. But then I saw it, a small black bag tucked under a bush. Inside was a burner phone, a voice modulator, and a USB drive. My hands were shaking as I took it inside. I used an old laptop, one I'd disconnected from the internet, to check the USB. It was another video, this time showing Sarah at the grocery store, the kids at school, me at work. But there was something else. Audio recordings of that scratchy voice, time-stamped from the night of the blackout. I listened to the recordings, and my blood ran cold. They weren't just random threats. They mentioned specific things, arguments Sarah and I had, the kids' bedtime routines, even a fight I'd had with a coworker months ago. This wasn't just someone watching us. This was someone who knew us, someone who'd been close to us for a long time. I started thinking about everyone we knew. Lisa was cleared. Brian claimed he was a victim too. But what about someone else? A coworker? A neighbor? Someone from my past? I made a list of everyone I could think of, anyone who might have a grudge. But no one stood out. I was about to give up when Sarah found something that changed everything. She was cleaning out the attic, trying to keep busy, when she found an old box of my stuff from college. Inside was a journal I'd kept back then, just random thoughts, nothing special. But taped to the back cover was a photo I didn't remember taking. It was me and Jenny, the girl from '99, the one Brian and I fought over. And written on the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a single word: revenge. Jenny. I hadn't thought about her in years. She'd moved away after high school, and I'd lost touch. But now, I was wondering, was she behind this? Had she been holding a grudge all this time? I tried to track her down online, but there was nothing. No social media, no records, like she'd just disappeared. I called an old friend from college, asked if he'd heard from her. He said she'd had a rough life, got into some trouble, moved around a lot, but no one knew where she was now. That night, the calls started again, even with the signal jammer on. The voice was angrier now. Jack, you're digging into things you shouldn't. Jenny's not your answer. I froze. How did they know I was looking into Jenny? I hadn't told anyone, not even Sarah. I checked the house again, and sure enough, I found another camera. In the attic, right where Sarah had found the journal. Someone had been up there, watching us, listening to us. I was done playing games. I called a private investigator, a guy named Carl I found online. Told him everything. Gave him the USB drives, the photos, everything. He said he'd look into it, but it would take time. In the meantime, he suggested we get out of the house again. Somewhere public. Somewhere with lots of people. So we checked into a busy hotel downtown, thinking maybe the crowds would make it harder for whoever this was to get to us. But the next morning, Carl called me with a bombshell. He'd traced the burner phone, the one from the backyard. It was registered to a name I didn't expect. Greg, my old boss from the hardware store. I hadn't worked there in months. Quit after a big fight with him over some missing inventory. He'd been pissed, said I'd regret crossing him. I thought he was just blowing off steam. But now, I wasn't so sure. I didn't want to believe it, but it made sense. Greg knew my schedule, my habits. He'd been to our house once, for a company barbecue. He could have planted cameras, gotten access to our phones. But why? Why go this far? I told Carl to keep digging, but I wasn't waiting around. I went to Greg's house, ready to confront him. But when I got there, the place was empty. Neighbors said he'd moved out weeks ago. No forwarding address. That night, back at the hotel, the voice called again. Jack, you're getting close. But you're still wrong. Greg's not your guy. Check your email. I opened my laptop, and there it was. An email from an anonymous account. It had a single attachment. A photo of me, standing outside Greg's house that afternoon. Someone had been there, watching me, and I hadn't even noticed.